Okay, so again, I'm Tim Wilson, and with Home Forward Iowa, and we're going to talk about conducting a successful rural point in time count, and the focus is going to be on the unsheltered count because as it turns out, we'll talk about the differences and go over some definitions and so forth. But because we're talking about rural areas that don't have shelters, then pretty much everybody who's homeless at that moment is unsheltered. So. The training will have some tips and reminders for doing the point in time count anywhere, but particularly in rural areas. And I'm a believer in it, and I say this that if you do the point in time count right, and I think it's probably about as true for urban areas, you not only know on the night of the point in time count, you not only know where to look, but who you're looking for. And so we're going to talk about how we get to that point today over the next hour. Go ahead to the next slide. So what is the point in time count? It's an official count. The Department of Housing and Urban Development that is required of continuums of care. And we'll talk about what continuums of care are. There's a sheltered count that's required every year, and an unsheltered count that's required every other year. And each count is planned, coordinated, and carried out locally, which is why most of you are here, I think. Okay, next, go ahead, next slide. And just to review, what is a continuum of care? Because the term gets used a lot. We call it COC for short. It is an entity or a system that was created by HUD, a regional local planning body that coordinates housing and services funding for homeless families and individuals. Another way to look at it is it's just a unit recognized by HUD for governance, performance, and funding. And probably the latter is what's most important most of the time to most of us, the funding, because that's what drives the continuum of care funding, which, other than in the pandemic, is the primary source of funding for homeless services here in Iowa. Okay, next slide. So why do we conduct this census of homelessness? Well, HUD requires it, for one thing, and it's important because the data gathered used in formulas to determine how much federal funding states and continuums of care receive. But it's also useful information for other sources of funding from your local governments, for those of you lucky enough to have local governments that actually provide direct funding for homeless services. United Ways, community foundations, local housing trusts, any other grant makers or funders, the data that they're collected are absolutely valid for that. And in the summer, in the summer count, which is not required, but which we are going to do in several counties as at least as a practice, maybe for the winter count in some cases. In some cases, you've just been doing it so long, you do it twice a year that it's just a routine. But those numbers are likely going to be higher in July than in January, right? Because more people are in Iowa, more people are going to be able to safely sleep outside or in their car in July than at the end of January. So, and then there are other sources of data that do get included in these funding formulas, the HIC, or the Housing Inventory Count, which obviously is a shelter, it involves the shelters. And then, of course, the reporting from the COC annual performance reviews and ESG data that grantees are no doubt familiar with. Okay, next slide. So we mentioned that there is a sheltered and unsheltered count in rural versus urban. And the sheltered is people, guess what, who are in emergency shelters or transitional housing or safe havens. And then look at the unsheltered homeless persons, and then references to the rule, to the definition in HUD speak and in HUD documentation. and you see those places that they list on the HUD trainings, which include bus or train station or airport. And next slide, we don't really have those so in rural Iowa so much. But what we do have, what we might add here, fairgrounds, any county or state park, parking lots, especially 24-hour businesses, farm buildings, abandoned trailers, abandoned houses, buildings with a protective alcove or side area, especially if there's electrical or other equipment that generates heat. Now, and a lot of times you'll see, maybe not so much in July, but in the winter, you'll see like a tarp kind of jerry rig next to a generator, and people sleeping in managing to take advantage of the heat that equipment's generating that's outside. HUD standards allow for a limited number of methodologies, but require, among other things, that all areas in a continuum of care be included, that all persons counted are verified as being homeless that night, whatever night that continuum of care has set for the point in time count, which for us is, this is good, which is for us is July 28th, the night of July 28th into the morning of the 29th. Since the summer's a practice count, some areas in Iowa may not be surveyed. I know not every region is going to cover every county in their region, but hopefully we'll get into the high 30s at least this year. And all counties must be surveyed in that in the January count, in the official count. So next slide. What are we looking for here? Well, there's a survey, and they ask questions like, what's your race? Do you have a disability? Have you ever served in the military? What's your birthday? The interviews typically don't take much more than 5 minutes. If it's a veteran, there's a kind of an extended set of questions that might add a little bit of time. And those being interviewed are informed that they can refuse to answer any questions they do not that they don't choose to answer. And that's explained in trainings that we're going to, another part of the training that we're going to talk about a little bit. So next slide. How do we find out where to look and who to look for? Well, law enforcement is hugely helpful because guess what? In most communities, the sheriff's deputies and or police, depending on whether you're talking about rural or small towns or maybe the county seat, they're going to know if people are experiencing homelessness for any period of time. The Department of Natural Resources is going to be helpful in terms of the parks, if you've got county parks or if you've got state parks in your area. A lot of communities, not all, but a lot of communities, the public library is a place where people will hang out during the day if they have no place else to go. Certainly clinics and ER staff, county assistance is going to know of people that now they're not going to be able to disclose names, but they may be getting information about where people are staying. People are coming in for assistance. Food pantries, clothes closets. These are places where you're going to want to focus attention. Convenience and grocery stores, the staff, and particularly the staff, you don't want to talk to this person working at lunchtime. It's people that are closing, people that are opening, or if it's 24 hours, the overnight folks. And you want to talk to them tomorrow, and you want to talk to them 3 or 4 days before the count to remind them, or if it's a different person, and you want to talk to them that night, and you want to talk to them the next day. Church offices, usually it's, usually the secretary is going to be the person who's going to kind of be the point of contact for somebody looking for help, but it might be the priest or pastor, and they might also have some additional information. Community action staff, these are the agencies that typically used by people who might be at risk of or literally homeless. And then any local program that's, that's designed to help struggling individuals and families, whether that might be Habitat or it might be a kind of a combination of a coalition of churches or religious groups or service groups. And it's always important with any of these folks that we've been talking about in this last category. It's important to check with them more than once, as I've mentioned, including the day or day after, because although this might be part of our jobs, it's not part of their job, their regular jobs. So they've got other things to do and other things to worry about. So reminding them is going to be necessary and helpful. Okay, next slide. There are different ways, and this is really going to vary from community to community, about what the need is, what the advantages are to kind of a public awareness. It is certainly good to develop and distribute flyers, and posting them is going to be, again, depend on the community and on your how many volunteers you're able to enlist. It's good to include general information about the count, the time, the time of day, when what information is collected, how data are used. And so there's kind of different levels of well, there's several steps that you can help with kind of spreading that. The obvious priority is to communicate to people who might be unhoused on the night of the count, because that's who we're counting. But the typical places for posting flyers would include free meal sites, general assistance office, church offices, some of the places that we talked about already, laundromats for sure. And you might have a couple different messages. One would be general information, and one would really be targeting the folks that you might be counting the night of the count. And the information, a lot of the information would be the same, but there would be perhaps some nuanced differences. And we will be able to, if we have your email, if you're registered for this, we have your email. And we'll send out, Isabel and I will, over the next couple of days, send some examples of flyers that communities have developed here in Iowa and elsewhere, so that you can take a look at those and figure out if they would fit your needs or what you'd need to, to make them work, other than obviously changing the date and that kind of information. If you've got time, you got somebody who can do this, it's good to maybe write up, in a lot of this could be the same information that goes on the flyers. So some information that you would send to a local newspaper, who, if you've got local newspapers, they're often looking for news items, and they might run they might run a little story about the point in time count. And if you got a local radio station, sometimes they're looking for interviewees for those kind of public service segments. It might be 7 o'clock on Saturday morning that you're doing the interview, but if you can get that helps. And anything that we do in that regard is helping to raise awareness of homelessness in Iowa, and that's never a bad thing. If there are events, maybe there's a chance to set up a table that you kind of have to look at what the primary audience was for that. But in terms of sites, free meal sites and clothes closets are probably going to be your best bet, because folks that are struggling are going to certainly be looking to probably knowing about and looking and taking advantage of free meal opportunities, including information on housing resources. Well, here's the thing, while that night we're counting people who are experiencing homelessness, we have across Iowa, for the first time, we actually have resources to get people housed. So if you run across somebody in the next 3 days and they're experiencing homelessness, but by the time of the count they're actually housed, that's a win. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So that's any information you can get out to people is going to be valuable. And even if it's that night, if it's that night that you're first getting that information, one of the things that we can do, at least for those who have access to HMIS, you can follow up and see if people who were housed or people who you reached and provided housing information actually followed through and applied and were entered and would appear on the pull list in the future, because that's also, that's a success as well. In terms of an email address or phone number that you'd put in information, whether it's on flyers or information that might go into a newspaper or that you give over the air, determine an email address to share as well. For email, you might use the address of someone very involved in the process, or if you've got the option to create a new one that will be checked regularly. Phone options would depend on the structure of your effort and the scale. You may want to just use the general number at your agency or office, or you may be able to create a separate extension on which people can leave messages. Depends on your phone system. Or you could purchase a prepaid cell phone usage plan just for the window during which the pit is being planned and taking place, and obviously use that number. In any case, you want to make sure the phone and email are checked regularly so that if people are leaving messages, that they're responding. And in the information that you leave here or anywhere, or in this case, do not list the statewide call number for pit information. Though it's fine to include that in information about housing assistance. For staff and volunteers, you should encourage people to use, if they're going to call somebody back from their personal phone, you tell them it's fine to block the caller ID so that so their number's not showing up on somebody else's phone. Again, if it's their personal phone. All right, let's talk about trainings and what's out there. Well, there's this training, right? The HUD, there are HUD training videos. There's a whole series on the point in time count. One of the things you'll find with most of them, except for the ones that Will Snow does, William Snow, they're very urban centric, and the examples and references tend to be more things that are typical in cities, but there's still maybe some pointers. The critical trainings for those who are going to actually be doing the data entry on the point in time count are with the Institute for Community Alliances, and those trainings are available at this website that you see. Their video trainings. The ones that we need to take would be the unsheltered, and then depending on your agency, either you do collect HMIS or you don't, and that would become obvious when you go to that site. The form itself, as will be explained, you can do literally on your cell phone. You can do it on a pad. I will, because they will be handy for reasons that if they aren't already clear to you, be obvious. We will get print versions of the form so that people could ask the questions, and then wherever they were, and then later enter the data or give the data to somebody else to enter. But anybody's going to actually be conducting interviews or entering data must complete these trainings. And then you can do local trainings for volunteers, and Isabel and I can help with those. But you can do again, depending on what your sort of volunteer cadre is going to look like and what kind of jobs you have. You might want to do some additional trainings just locally. Okay, and then in terms of volunteer opportunities, next slide here. A lot of times I hear people describe recruiting volunteers, and the only thing they talk about or think about or convey is going out in the middle of the night. And of course, most of the time that's in the winter. That's just that's selling the whole process very short. And it also limits the number. It limits the kind of people and the folks who it limits your volunteer pool. So what is scouting? Well, that's where you visit known locations like parks, riverbanks, fairgrounds. You have people that are going out during the day and looking for people who from from having talked to DNR and the sheriff's deputies, you have learned, okay, there might be somebody at this park at this particular campsite, or there might be somebody that's, that's living in this abandoned building, that kind of thing. So you got that. That's a volunteer opportunity that doesn't necessarily involve being being directly doing something the night of the count. There's collecting resources, and just about anybody can do that. We're looking for things that when we encounter folks in the point in time count, we're giving them stuff. And we're going to talk more about stuff. Stay tuned. We'll talk more about good stuff at the end. So we're looking for things like protein bars, cans with pull tabs that don't require heating or refrigeration, or a can opener, obviously, nuts, peanut butter, things that have protein, toiletries like hand sanitizer, toilet paper, toothpaste, toothbrushes, floss, deodorant. What for those of you who've experienced, who've done this before, what are some of the other kinds of things that people appreciate having in terms of that sort of goodie bag, if you will? Okay. It looks like somebody had something to add. No, go ahead. Okay, there you go. Right. And we've got, right. Hygiene products, very important. So thanks for that. Oh yeah, I forgot we've got a chat. Thanks for that, Rachel. And laundry soap, right. Sunscreen, yeah, this time of year. Good. One of the things that you, and I guess it sort of depends on your community and what works best, but part of it would be like something to collect all this stuff in. It could be backpacks, it could be gently used backpacks, it could be canvas bags, tote bags, but that you basically have something to put all this stuff in. In terms of clothing, yeah, socks, underwear, and in the winter, certainly hand warmers and gloves. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, lip, like the lip, not lip gloss, but stuff for chapped lips. Yes. And then, and then that volunteer, and then so there's going out and collecting this stuff, hopefully donated from dollar stores or Hy-Vee or Fairway or wherever, or that you ask churches to collect the stuff that you need and communicate what you need. Then there's putting all that, you store it somewhere, and then the day of, or maybe a couple days before, you have folks sort it out and put it in, put it into the back, put all that stuff into the backpacks. And again, that's something that doesn't matter. 6-year-olds, a family can help with that. Or seniors, people that you typically would not have involved in the direct count could do that. Another thing to include in that, in kind of putting together the information is, or putting in information that you're collecting to share with people. We talked about the housing resources, and you certainly want to have the information about who in your what number in your region, whether it's local or whether it's the statewide hotline, about who to call if for rapid rehousing or for rental assistance. And you can include the IFA website as well. But kind of you want to create a pocket-sized resource card that includes that information, but also suicide hotlines, addresses and hours of clinics, addresses and hours of food pantries and clothes closets, that kind of thing. Anything that somebody would, now granted, some of these, if these folks have been experiencing homelessness for a while, they're probably going to know some of this, but it's good to have that. And if you can, absolutely, it's worth chapstick. Thank you, Aaron. It's good to have that laminated if there's any way to get it laminated, because carrying around 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper when you're sleeping in environments that are exposed to rain or in wind and so forth, it's just better if you can make it smaller and laminate it so that it's less susceptible to the elements. Another, with meal sites, what's a great idea, start awareness but as before the count, obviously. And if the meal sites are like gold mines for folks. And if it's weekly, but in rural areas, they tend not to be daily, right? They're usually maybe a couple times a month. But if you can get in there and have a volunteer there, explain to people about the count, and hopefully there'd be an opportunity to do an announcement or announcements periodically during the mealtime. And if it's within a few days of the count, you could absolutely do you could have people doing the interviews. And then obviously the point in collecting information is conduct the pit interviews, and that we do the night, if you can, before, like at meal sites or public or semi-public locations that are convenient and safe for those who are being surveyed. And we're going to talk more about safety here on the next slide. So it is imperative to convey that you understand, and that any and all volunteers that you're working with understand that safety first. Nobody should ever put themselves in a situation where they don't feel safe. You want to develop a safety protocol that fits the situations of your community, and that's going to vary a lot from community to community. But you explain to volunteers that first rule is safety first, and anyone going to visit known or suspected sites where someone might be staying, especially on the night of the count, you wouldn't be doing that alone. You'd be doing that in at least pairs and preferably in teams. You can, and pairing and tripling is fairly common on the night of, but you should also employ that when people are going to known sites ahead of time, at least certainly at night. If you're in any remote locations where you're entering any building, and that's a situation, again, you're going to have to know your community and know the situation. You might very well want to engage law enforcement for that, and you might want to engage law enforcement for many aspects of that if they're willing to assist. And usually people are within, with reasonable requests. Now, deputies and officers will typically not leave their vehicles, but if you're going out again on that night, if you're going into some place, you might want to bring them, but you have to keep in mind a couple of things. One is, if you're going into a situation, and I'm going to look at Ottumwa has a lot of vacant houses, and a lot of those houses are occupied by people who are experiencing homelessness. In some cases, the individual in there had one or more law enforcement officers has developed a relationship with them, and that's going to be kind of a plus. In other cases, that is going to be a turnoff, right? People are going to be, because of any number of reasons, they're not going to want to be forthcoming. They're not maybe even going to want to acknowledge that they're there if they see somebody in a uniform. So you kind of have to play that one based on your community, because you don't want to. Ultimate goal for us is to get as much information as we can from as many individuals who are experiencing homelessness. But again, we can't compromise the safety, our own safety, or that of volunteers. So have a plan in place and clearly discuss beforehand the plan with law enforcement agency and individuals involved. And some officers may be willing to dress in street clothes and use unmarked cars. That's obviously going to help overcome some barriers with some people. And it certainly doesn't hurt to ask that. The next slide, there are some communities I mentioned to Tumwa where you there are indoor locations where you're gonna find where folks are. That's where folks are living. That's where you're finding them, and it could be any of these things that are listed. And again, you're going to have to just use discretion and judgment. But if you're encountering someone, and ideally, they know who it is, or they know something about the count because they've read your flyers, they've heard about it, somebody else has told them, they've actually met with somebody. So you want to encourage, if possible, somebody to step out or to meet somewhere in the days that are in the following day or days. Volunteers should never enter an abandoned buildings alone. If you have already established contact with someone who might be staying in such a location, let them know when you expect to come by, and work out some kind of signal or some way to indicate your arrival if necessary, and for them to acknowledge their presence. Or you can send a text if that's possible, if they've got a cell phone and you do. It's a good example of a situation when it's advantageous to have collected the information from the person or persons beforehand. And we'll talk a little bit about that. If you've already completed a paper survey or have previous knowledge of the individual, all you need to do that night is verify their location and intent to stay that night. In other words, that this is the point in time count that night. And what you need to know either at that moment or after is that they were indeed experiencing homelessness that night, that's where they were. If you encounter someone unexpected who's not already known and they are willing to be surveyed, you'd have some options. So if there's somebody that you haven't encountered them before, kind of stumbled upon them, again, encourage them to step out or to set a time to meet them, maybe the next morning for coffee or something like that, so you can do the survey. Or you can ask the questions through a door or a window, maybe, and record their responses if that's possible. And again, that's going to depend on the situation. You can offer to do the interview via cell phone. And again, or just arrange to meet them somewhere where they'd feel safe and where you'd feel safe. Maybe it's not you particularly, maybe it's some other volunteer or somebody else, but just to arrange that so that the interview can be conducted. And okay, so back to on the next slide, we're going to talk about we're going to take a look at the actual survey. We don't have the actual survey here, but we know I mentioned what some of the questions are. So if you remember, we ask about name, gender, the general age range, veteran status, reasons for becoming homeless. What we don't ask people is what they ate, their most recent meal, whether they've consumed alcohol within the past 3 hours, how many miles they've walked to that day, and we don't take their temperature. The first set of questions, name, gender, age, etc., those aren't likely to have changed in the past few days or month or even year, right? I don't know how, probably if you're talking to somebody, the count's Wednesday night, if you talk to somebody on Monday afternoon, and they were a veteran on Monday afternoon, they're probably going to be a veteran on Wednesday, or vice versa. If they weren't a veteran, they probably are not going to have enlisted and been discharged in the ensuing 2 days. So the latter questions are temporal, and they would be relevant to that specific moment, but we don't ask those things. So if we have the chance to encounter somebody before the moment, before the actual point in time now, why wouldn't we gather as much information from them as we could at that moment? How far in advance would you conduct an interview? Well, you'd have to use your knowledge and judgment. If this is somebody you encountered in pretty much the same circumstances in place in January, they're probably more likely to be homeless the night of the summer count than someone you only met a few days before and reports they expect to be getting a ride to Kansas City the following day. while it never hurts to collect information, keeping in mind that it's confidential and you have to treat it as such if you're writing it down on paper, it may be better to use the time to explore other known locations or interviews others other than to go through the survey with someone you deem unlikely to be literally homeless on the night of the count. So in other words, not waste your time if somebody really seems like they're, you're talking to somebody a few days ahead of time and they may be homeless at that moment, but they've got plans. You may not want to spend your time doing the interview with them, but what you do need to do is whenever you collect the information from them, we still need to validate, we need to verify that they were homeless on the night of the 28th, right? Go on to the planning calendar, or the next slide. And there's some things that are like, there's sort of a good, a best scenario, good enough. And the best is that you've already started this process, that you've already got some of the things that we've talked about done, because we're 3 weeks out from the count itself. But when only, that's going to depend on how many folks you've got. When only some are very few resources are available, it's still possible and still necessary to do the count. But what it means is there's just fewer people doing the work. So early tasks would be, and this would be like 3 to 6 weeks ahead of the count. You've got your contacts for the known locations. You're determining volunteer goals and needs, what you're going to have, what you're looking for in terms of volunteers. And that's going to depend on how ambitious you are. Volunteer recruitment, it's never too early to start. And if you are getting some volunteers now, hopefully they're going to learn, understand the process, and they'll be ready to help in January. And then you can begin to collect the items for the kids, right? The toiletries and foods and socks and so forth. And in some places you're just not going to be able to do that, but if you can, that's great. And then you're going to compile hopefully those resources that are going to go on the laminated cards that we talked about. Okay, next slide. So 2 to 3 weeks out, that's when if you were going to do volunteer training, you would do it then. You tailor to the tasks that are part of the plan that you've developed, and certainly reference anybody that's going to do the actual interviews needs to do the training on how to complete the form on the ICA website. And it's important to meet with volunteers who'll be completing the survey. They'll need to understand the plan for collecting responses, including how the interviews are to be conducted, location, schedule, those night of supplies, where those are going to be, and how whatever provisions are provided to those interviewed are going to be handled. They'll also need to know how to refer questions about resources, because people are probably going to ask questions. And in terms of the volunteer roles, for other volunteer duties, it kind of depends on the size of the crew. The more tasks you're able to delegate to others, the more meetings are going to be needed by whoever the leader is. But most of those meetings don't really need to be lengthy. You're really just explaining kind of the volunteer roles and what's to be done. But for example, if you have 5 people who'd be soliciting donations, it'd be helpful to start with a plan of who's going to go to which, who's going to go to which stores, so you're not doubling up on people, and who's asking for what items and that kind of thing. And then just make notes on that of like where you're getting stuff, so that in January, if you're able to get, to score a bunch of toothbrushes from a particular place, make a note of that and see if that's going to be an option again in January. Then for the week before, you want to assess whatever you got for the kits, and ensure that the volunteers are conducting the surveys and have completed that ICA training before they're going to be actually talking to anybody. Take it, if you can encounter folks and do the survey ahead of time, to start that process. Again, you're going to be doing it on paper then, and then entering the data, because you're not going to enter the data. I don't even think the system will allow it. You're not going to enter the data until the night of or after. And whatever you get a complete survey from somebody, All you need to do then is verify that they're going to be where they said they're hanging out, right? In whatever park, or maybe it's, I'll either be in the Walmart parking lot or the Hy-Vee parking lot. So just that night, you or somebody's going to check to see if they, based on the description of their car, were actually there that night. You're going to touch base again with all the known location contacts like law enforcement, DNR. You're going to sweep those known locations where you have identified that, yes, people are, either we know for sure they are, they're very likely to be there. You're going to draft a route map, because somebody's going to go out, somebodies are going to go out that the night of to check on all the people that you, on the known sites, the likely sites, and again, where anybody, we have information from people that that's where they're, that's where they're going to be that night. You assemble the kits for the distribution that we talked about, whether you're putting it in backpacks or handy bags or whatever. And then for the day of, you're basically, if you got all the other stuff done, then this is really going to flow pretty naturally. You're going to finalize the map routes if there's any variations for somebody to be driving around the county to hit this state park and that town library and that Casey's and so forth. You want your crews, if it's whoever's going out that night, you want them to make sure they've got flashlights, clipboards, pens, probably mosquito repellent. If you've got, this will be when you double check with law enforcement if you're going to involve law enforcement. And you'd be going over those sites again, the sites where you're expecting people to be. And let's see, and then with this, where yeah, and you're verifying the folks that you've already interviewed. You get, whatever the process is that you're doing, that you're just, again, you don't have to do the interview with them because you've already done it. You're just verifying that they are where they said they'd be, or in one of the locations where they said they could be. And you really, in most counties in Iowa, you won't need more than two crews that are actually doing kind of the overnight into the early morning of that sweep. You can start your actual sweep anytime, but this time of night, when it's still going to be light, pretty late. You can start around 10, or you can start a little earlier or a little later, and just extend that as long as necessary. But again, at that point, all you're doing is you're verifying that people, you're verifying the people you've already interviewed. You're going to known sites where maybe you haven't interviewed people, but you have good reason to believe that somebody's there. And then the next slide, what's the follow-up? All right, well, you check with law enforcement, you check with anybody that was on duty that night, deputies, officers. You check, you go back to known locations where you didn't find anybody, in case there's somebody that they got back from work late or whatever it might be there. You check with anybody else that you've asked to kind of be on the lookout for somebody to see, well, you said there might be somebody, or there's sometimes somebody who sleeps in that shed. Did you see anybody last night in that shed? And if so, try to get as much information so you could do a follow-up interview with that person, and they may very well know that person. And then you start to enter the data in the portal, which is going to be explained on the ICA training of where you the data that you've collected on paper. And let's see, for following the unconfirmed leads. By that's anyone who's indicated they might be unhoused that night, or who knew someone who might have been, and just to check to see what the situation was actually on the 28th. And then look for the names of those who assisted on that, and this is obviously, going to be maybe a couple of weeks out, but for those of you, again, that have the HMIS license to participate in poll meetings, look to see, did any of these names that got collected on the point in time count, are they showing up on the list as having applied for housing assistance? Because that's a success story. All right, wanted to talk about stuff that goes in the bags. Here's the deal. I alluded in the invitation that went out to this, that there would be there would be something here for everybody. And what something is, I have through Hy-Vee and through a generous donation from Randy and Dawn Edeker, and Dawn Edeker in particular, but Randy Edeker is the CEO of Hy-Vee. I have secured for our use in the summer point in time count, 400 $10 Hy-Vee gift cards that can be used obviously at any Hy-Vee. I don't know. I don't know how they were programmed. I don't know if these are the kind that would prohibit them from being used from tobacco and alcohol, but they're $10 gift cards. And what I want to do is, first of all, anybody that's participated here, you get 5 for your CSR without doing anything else, even if you're not doing the count. For everybody, but for everybody else, I want you to do assess, take what we've talked about here and assess how many people do you think you're going to find on that night based on what you can do. And by next Friday, turn that in, send an email to myself and Isabel with just kind of an outline of what your plan is, your organization, like how many volunteers you have, what you're doing. Cite your January 2021 observational count, and that's available on the ICA website. You can there's a map that says, well, it says 2020 point in time count, but it's really 2021 point in time count. And you can hover over the county and you can see, if you didn't know beforehand, how many people were found in the winter when we were doing the observational account. And again, most of Iowa, most of the time, you're going to find at least as many people in July. You should be finding at least as many people in July as you did in January who were literally homeless. And now there are a couple of numbers when you hover over the county, but there's one that's unsheltered, and that's what we're looking at, the unsheltered, because again, that's who we're looking for. And then how many gift cards you'd like to have, and then or how many of any additional gift cards you have, meaning, did you get some from your local Hy-Vee? Did you get some gift cards from Fairway or Casey's or Come and Go or anybody, or Dollar General, if they give gift cards? I don't know. Anyway, if you've solicited any of those, and then how many you'd like of these 400. And the number of unsheltered in Iowa was well over 400 in the January count, but that does include cities, and we're not talking about cities here. So we'd be looking at we're going to be looking at your rural count. So that's what that's the deal, and we'll get those out to you, in plenty of time to get them out to folks. Let's see, what else? What else do we need to know? What questions arise, or what other suggestions do people have for things that you've tried that work? Whether it's relationships with contact with law enforcement, or getting helping get the word out, or anything any way that you found maybe to engage folks who might be otherwise reluctant to want to be interviewed. Any of the above. And just for this, just take yourself off mute. Anyone? All right. Well, I thought of a couple other things I wish I'd added, but I think if that's, if nobody has any other wisdom to share, yeah, thanks everybody for what you're doing with point in time count and what you're doing in your work. As I said, we will, if you registered for this, and presumably you have, if not, send an email us, and we'll send out some sample flyers that you could use, or that other folks have used, and you can kind of steal ideas if you think they'll work for you. If you would like for some help with with the volunteer training, or yeah, at this point I think that's what it would be, really, around volunteers. Let me know, and we'll try to work that out for you. And that's great. Well, yeah, you'd be working with the folks in Davenport. And I think for you, Michael, just look at your I mean, make a case for, again, our focus was rural, and you really you had the warming shelter there, but if you're picking up folks in the county, just make a case, explain, like, where they were and why you think there might be a half a dozen or a dozen in various corn cribs or parking lots in the smaller towns, or that kind of thing. We'll send those out to you, and then yeah, just work on your kind of work on as much as you can get ahead of time of planning, getting a handle on where you're going to be looking and how many folks you're going to be redoing, and then we'll take a look at all the numbers here. I can't promise everybody's going to get all the gift cards they want, but we'll do our best. We'll look at the cases you make, and then anything that we don't use, they'll still be available for the winter count. But let's try to use as many as we can to try to find as many people, because I think we can come up with some very dynamic and attention-getting numbers with an effective summer point in time count, as we did with the January one. But we lost, because that was virtual. We didn't get, all we got were numbers. We didn't really get much. We don't know how many men, women, racially, we break down veterans, reasons for homelessness, and all that much richer data that goes into reports that the ICA can take and process and help us, so you can start banging your county supervisors and city councils over the head about what your situation is really like, and what the numbers are. So all right, well, with that, thanks to everybody, and good luck with the count. We'll be in touch, and we'll be looking to hear from all of you, or at least from representatives from your region. So thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day.